home, and I'm kind of just taking in the afternoon, and my brother calls me, and as he usually is, he's filled with good news, and he proceeds to tell me that the Philip that the Ethiopian met beside the road was not the Philip who was a disciple. So I wanted to apologize. I led y'all in the wrong last week, but I do want to say this. I do believe that Philip was a part of the group and had seen Jesus. He just was not one of the 12. Okay? So for all clarity's sake, just want to tell you that. I don't want to lie to you up here. Okay? That's how serious I am. I know it's a small thing. Most of you would probably never have found that, but I don't want you to find this out 6 years from now and say, Pastor John lied to us about that. What else is he lying to us about? So I wanted to be perfectly transparent with you and tell you that the Philip that the Ethiopian met became Philip the evangelist, who had 4 daughters who prophesied, that Paul later met I got to remember this, Caesar Maritime, in Caesar Maritime. And the other Philip, apparently he went on to another place and was martyred. Okay? So, but actually the Philip with the daughters was not martyred, as I understand it. He lived a full life. So, there you go. That's my, what they call that in the newspaper when they have to go back, a retraction. That's my retraction for this week. Okay? All right. So, we talked last week about baptism. We're going to talk this week. I like to, when we do a baptism, I like to go back to first things. I like to make sure that we're still going in the direction that we're going, because we can get talking about things that are up here and maybe are great for understanding and knowing and everything else, and we can forget the little things, the things that we start with. So we're going to talk today about avoiding Satan's snares. And now I'm going to preface this by saying this is not the snares that we put ourselves in. Okay? So it says the fruit of the Spirit, one of them is self-control. And self-control means that we start taking accountability for our own actions. And in our own actions, we quit doing the silly things that lead us into sin. Because Satan doesn't need to do anything. It's a little like the kid that comes up that everybody on the baseball team knows isn't going to hit it past the infield. And so everybody moves in and forms a wall. So as soon as he hits it, they throw it to first base, throw him out. Okay? Satan's not worried about that one. No, he starts worrying when it's the kid that may or may not hit it over the fence. We bring in the good pitcher. We do that. That's when Satan gets involved a lot of times in our life. And he starts sending things that derail us. He's trying to derail us. If we notice in Jesus' ministry, there's not a lot of talk about Satan early on, but when God declares that this is my son with whom I'm well pleased, after Jesus' baptism, it says, then Jesus went into the wilderness, and who shows up? Satan. He comes, and he didn't come in the first day, it says he waited until Jesus had fasted 40 days and was physically weak. Then he starts showing Jesus these different things. He starts questioning Jesus' authority. He tries to get Jesus just to give up all this, and I think even Satan knew where this was heading. He starts getting Jesus to give up this whole thing, and he says, if you'll bow to me, I'll give you all the nations that you can see from up here on the spire of the temple. And he starts distracting Jesus with the big things. But it's the same in our lives. That once you start getting that self-control thing and you start stopping yourself from doing stupid things that kind of disqualify you, then Satan wants to start doing his tricks. And his tricks aren't smart. They're silly. But they trap us all the same. All right, so we're going to do this for the next 2 weeks. We're going to cover a couple this first week, a couple next week, because I know who I am, and I would keep you guys here till 12:30 before I finally wrapped up, and I'm afraid most of you would walk out on me. So we're going to divide this up. I'm going to try to keep this fairly moving and simple and quick, okay? So the first thing we're going to look at, we're going to discover Satan's nature, and we're going to go a familiar verse. I love this verse, 1 Peter 5:8. I don't know if any of you keep track of how often I say I love this verse. It's a lot. I like the Bible, though, in case you haven't figured that out. It says, stay alert, watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Stand against him and be strong in your faith. Remember that your family of believers all over the world is going through the same kind of suffering that you are. Stay alert. And in other words, be sober, be vigilant. In other words, be in a capacity to see your enemy, and then be watching. Stay alert. He's saying we need to be looking. It says that it's curious that the armor of God, much like the armor of old, does not mention a backplate. The armor is meant to be facing the enemy. Now, when I was a young kid, in 5th and 6th grade, Eddie was the basketball coach, and I was the manager because I had no athletic ability. But I listened to him on some of the easiest ways to play basketball. And you know what the first rule of basketball is? Playing defense. Do you know what it is? It's number one rule. But you should be between your man and the basket. He should not have a clear route to the basket or to the goal in this case. You should be in between him and the basket. Number 2 rule, your hand should be above the ball. And in other words, the ball should not have a direct sight to the basket. And the number 3 rule is if you can get him to go to his offhand, that's a great thing. Because if he can't really dribble well, you can always get a hold of the ball that way. But if he's a good dribbler both hands, see rule 1 and 2. Simple. I told you in a minute the very basics of playing defense in basketball. It's the same with the kingdom of God. Your armor, the armor that Paul talks about, should always be between you and the enemy. There shouldn't be the open parts of the armor, should not be getting anywhere near the enemy. That's why there's no backplate on most armor. You're not supposed to be running away. The armor goes between you and the enemy. Seems simple, doesn't it? It says, watch out for your great enemy, the devil. It says he prowls around like a roaring lion. Do you know why it's a roaring lion? Because lions get behind their prey. If there's a plain in front of them and a path of trees where the other lions are, they send lions around into the plain area to attack from the grass, and they roar. So it scares the herds towards the lions. They herd the herd into the lions. A roaring lion. He's trying to get you to go where he wants you to go. So if over here is the path that God has you, which is, as we understand, is straight and narrow. And over there is the wide way. The devil's trying to get you to go to the wide way, to the easy way. Do you get that? He's like a roaring lion trying to force you off the path that you're going. And be strong in your faith. Remember that your family of believers all over the world is going through the same kind of suffering that you are. And in other words, you're not receiving any, no temptation has overtaken you such that is common to man. And in other words, it's all the same tricks. He doesn't devise anything special for you. He just does what he does with everybody. For men, a lot of times, I'm just going to be really blunt here. For men, a lot of times he puts the wrong woman in front of them. And many of them, we hear a lot about that in the news. I don't know how he tempts women. I'm not real sure about that, but I'm sure there's another way that he does that for them. Men are easy. They're visual. Anyways, he uses common things. And that's exactly what Peter is saying here. It's the same going for every believer in the world. We're all going down that same path in some form or fashion. And it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy because the devil doesn't want it to be easy. He doesn't want to see you succeed. And most importantly, he doesn't want you to have any authority to be able to help somebody else succeed. So stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. Why do you stand firm? What did I just tell about? If you're retreating, your back's exposed. Easier for the enemy to get darts. How else do cats attack? Cats attack from the back. They like to sneak up and ambush their prey. I've told you this before, but there's a community over in the Asian countries, and they were being attacked by tigers. And you know how they beat the tigers? They put a mask on the back of their head, and the tiger could no longer sneak up on them because it thought that the people were always looking where they were coming from. Simple. But they like to attack from the back. They like to blindside you, as we would call that. Let's keep going. So we're gonna first thing that we're gonna do is we're not gonna stray. It says we have to get past just following Christ when it's comfortable, when it's convenient. So we're not gonna stray. Let's read our verse. It says, I used to wander off until you disciplined me, but now I closely follow your word. You are good and do only good. Teach me your decrees. Why do we follow evil? I don't know. Maybe it's something that we understand, something that we know. Maybe it's something that the world teaches. But it says God is looking for our best and for our good. Now, it's not always easy, but the good way is the right way. And it's worth finding. And he said, I used to wander off. This is David talking here. I used to wander off until you disciplined me. But now I closely follow your word. I look at the word. And how can you closely follow the word if you don't know the word? That's the real question here. How can you follow if you don't know? I closely follow your word. I'm not straying. I'm not going everywhere. How do we get to that point? We start forgetting whose we are. We quit offering up prayers. That worship time that we just did just a few minutes ago, it's hard for people. But sometimes worship has brought me back in different places that I've been where I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to make my next move. And the song that's been in my heart has been the very thing that's led me to choose the correct path. Because it put my mind back in Christ. I started focusing on who Christ is, what he's done for me, and what he's taught me up to this point. And it's given me the answer. I may not have liked that answer, but I understood whose I was once again. That's why it's so important to have personal worship time, whether that's prayer, whether that's singing, whether that's tithing, just spending time with God, understanding who he is, what he has for us. Are we doing that? Because that's the first step in not straying, like the psalmist is talking about here. We need to guard this very diligently. Next verse. James 4, which curiously was almost not included in the Bible because Christians of that time thought it was too simplistic. Now we look at James and consider it a profound book because Christians of this time is a very different. We're not martyred. We're not asked to do the impossible and need super deep truths. So we forget about these things that are mentioned in James. I find that so curious. The first time I heard that, I was like, "What? It was too simplistic?" And this is the same book that talks about the untamable tongue and how it can get you into trouble, and yet it seems like that's where Christians wind up at. Let's look at this. It says, "So humble yourselves before God." Remember, do you get what that means? Do you get what humble yourselves means? It means remember your place when it comes to God. You submitted to him. That is salvation's core belief. I've submitted to Jesus. I said, "You are my Lord and Master." I'm no longer my own. Boy, that's a hard word these days. Nobody wants to hear that. Instead, we remember stupid lines like, I do what I want. It's all about me. Humble ourselves before God. Remember who God is and what you have committed to. He's not saying this to the people that aren't committed to him. He's saying it to the ones that said, you are mine and I am yours. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Come close to God and he will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. James telling it like it is. You know why this is so hard? Because we don't see it being done. It'd be easy if we watched everybody out here and they all wanted to follow God and did the right things all the time, and then it was expected of us. But no, it's easy to act like the world. You know why? Because the world's way is all about themselves. They don't have a master. They don't have anybody that they pledge themselves to. The only people that they pledge to is their own wallet. Why do you think tithing and giving is so crucial in the Christian faith? We have to get past that master that the world is under, which is their own wallet. We have to let Jesus be the master of those things. That's why this message is so hard. That's why it's so easy to stray. All you have to do to stray is to only look at yourself. Only to look at the things that makes John happy. But what are the things that Jesus is happy? You know what he says? He said, I want you to care for widows and orphans. I want you to care for the people that no one else is caring about, because that's who I care about. And you're supposed to be a reflection of me. That's hard. Because there's a lot of people talking about those things, but very few that are actually doing it. Everybody wants oh wow, they're such a great person, but nobody really wants to dig in and do the work. On that note, thank you. Some of you didn't know these people that had this funeral yesterday, and yet you chose to donate food and your time to be able to help them yesterday over here in our fellowship hall. Thank you. I appreciate that. It speaks well of our relationship with God. It speaks well of our church. And I appreciate the fact that you went out of your way to help for that. Thank you. You know, when we're doing things like that, it gets hard to stray. Because we're sacrificing of ourselves. We're giving that part of ourselves. We're giving time. We're at least giving the money for the food that we're providing. That's part of it. I appreciate that you guys take that so seriously. So the very first thing, don't stray. So much is summarized in those little words. In fact, maybe the whole message summarized in don't stray. Keep following Christ. Keep on pressing on, as Paul talked about. I press on towards the high mark. Keep pressing on. Let's keep going. Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep regret. And let there be sadness instead of laughter, and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up in honor. Cry for the things that make the Lord cry. The things the Lord are concerned about, make it your concerns. Quit making your own concerns, and start making the Lord's concerns your concerns. It'll completely reprioritize who we are. Keep going. All right, the second thing is don't strut. Don't strut. So don't stray and don't strut. They're not all S's. I can just tell you that. Don't strut. Let's go in our verses. Pride goes before destruction, and haughtiness before a fall. If you read this in other versions, it says a haughty spirit before a fall. And in other words, a haughty inner man who thinks a lot of himself comes before a fall. How many times have we bragged about something that we could do, and then the situation shows that we weren't as good as what we said we were? Seems to happen a lot, at least it did for me. It's where I got really good at eating crow. And then you know what else you learn? You learn that you don't like the taste of crow, and then you quit making stupid statements. So just, I'm just saying one follows the other. If you're willing to eat the crow, you'll find you don't want to have to do it until you quit making those statements. Wisest man in the world says this. This is from Solomon. He says this. He says, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. It happens all the time. We see that in the world. We see people, the famous example, of course, is the Titanic, who they were saying it was absolutely unsinkable, and they talked about how they had designed these walls so wide, how they had redundancies upon redundancies. And they do the same thing with elevators. We have redundancies upon redundancies to stop that elevator in the shaft. And while an elevator is still safer than taking the stairs, elevators fail all the time. The Titanic failed. It didn't account for an iceberg that was just a little bit wider than those walls. It doesn't say the iceberg penetrated by much, but it was enough. Did you know that? It didn't cut through the bottom half of the ship. It cut through the wall just enough to let all the water in. And it hit just enough compartments, almost the exact amount of compartments it was going to have to hit to be able to sink the ship. Isn't that curious? One more than what the ship could take. I used to actually study this. They said I remember reading that in the book. It was I think it could have 20 compartments flood inside the ship and still stay afloat, and it took out exactly 21. Isn't that curious? But it was the pride of the shipbuilding world, and it sunk on its first voyage. Let's keep going. This is a great verse because it's neat, because it says these people heard Jesus and they believed Jesus, but not enough that they wanted to change anything. And I have to say, this is probably close to where the Christian world is. Many in the Christian world is they've heard him and they believe him, but not enough to change in front of their neighbors. They don't want to be the weird person. It says many people did believe in him, Jesus. I put in parentheses Jesus, I added that. However, including some of the Jewish leaders, but they wouldn't admit it for fear that the Pharisees would expel them from the synagogue. Or you can read that as the place where the community gathered. Because in that time, being Jewish meant that you went to synagogue. And the worst thing that could happen was for you to be expelled from the synagogue, because that meant you were expelled from the community's events. And they didn't want that. So, Jesus, you're great, but not enough for me to give up my friends and family. Kind of shed some new light on those verses that talk about unless you leave your friends and family, you have no part of me. That's what they're afraid of. They were afraid of being expelled from the community. For they loved human praise more than the praise of God. They loved hearing from their neighbors that, man, he's a great guy. He's a super guy. Always comes to synagogue. Fantastic guy. What a great guy. They didn't want to be the people that says, oh, did you hear him? He's going after that guy that he came through town, did a few miracles, but he started talking about some things, and the Pharisees got upset, and he was asking for followers, but who wants to have to leave this? Who wants to be an outcast? Who wants to be a person that people see as not one of us? They loved human praise more than the praise of God. Describes a lot of people that we know. Let's keep going. John 8 says that, so Jesus said, when you have lifted up the Son of Man on the cross, and you will understand that I am he. I do nothing on my own, but say only what the Father taught me. And the one who sent me is with me. He has not deserted me. I always do what pleases him. This is Jesus. Jesus, the model. And he says, I submit myself to God. I only do what the Father tells me to do. I only go where the Father says for me to go. I'm submitted to him. And Jesus says that because he's modeling it for us. Did you get that part? Why is he telling him this? This seems like a strange thing just to say to your friends. He's saying that because we'll get that that's what you're supposed to do. It's not about you anymore. If you're submitted to God, as Jesus said, I am submitted to the Father's will, then you do what the Father has told you to do. And Jesus is saying that back to the disciples. He said, because I am God's, I choose to do the things of God. He's not deserted me. We're not into the cross that he's talking to them about desertion. But he wanted them to know that God and I, we move as one. If he wants me over here, we go here. And that's what I love about the Bible when you take it as an overview of the New Testament. What you see is that Jesus would hurry to places, and then he would get there and he would spend time with the people that everybody else thought was unimportant. These outcasts, those ones that were already outside of the synagogue. And he would just sit there with them. Meanwhile, he's getting offers to come preach inside the synagogue, but he took time to go see a woman at a well and to spend time with her, sitting beside her, talking to her about the fact that she's had 5 husbands and the one she's with right now is not her husband. And he sat there and he talked with her. And yet he has offers to go other places, to stay in nice places. And he chooses to sleep outside of town in the forest where he might get some peace. Because he sees the Father. And he knows what the Father wants. He's willing to make the sacrifice. He said, this is worth making a sacrifice for. To do this right. To do this once and for always. To do this not just for the people of this day, but for the people 2,000 years ago that would be sitting in the Dowden Community Chapel. Let's keep going. We end for this week with this last verse, and then we go back to James 4:10. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up in honor. So this week we talked about not straying. Then we talked about don't think a lot of yourself. Don't get ahead of yourself. These are the first two ways of how we resist the enemy. Go ahead and come up. Are we doing this well? That's the real question we have to ask ourselves. It's easy for me to preach it up here, but if you're not hearing what I'm saying, it doesn't make a lot of sense to you. It's just another bunch of words, it's just another sermon, and many of you have heard thousands of sermons in your lifetime. What matters is the doing. Have we even gotten past the place where we're not sabotaging ourselves? Have we even gotten past the place that we're now getting on first base every time, and not just the kid that hits it to the infield every day? God wants you dangerous. He wants you to be able to cause the darkness to tremble. And it starts by first getting over yourself. And number 2, resisting the traps of the enemy. As we're talking about this, and I know it seems very basic, very things that you've heard all your life, I want you to think about, am I actually doing this? Because it's easy to hear the message, it's harder doing. If more people were doing, we would see a different world. Think about that as we sing this last song.